Welcome to the Outdoor Gibbon, episode 10, Scottish Red Stag. So this is a bit of a story about a recent stag stalk that I was given down in Pitlochery, and it basically just covers the day and chasing these stags, well, the kings of the hill around, and being in their environment and having to see what they do. Obviously, typical Scottish weather. 1 minute quite nice, the weather forecast says it's going to be bright. Next thing, it's absolutely chucking it down, and then as soon as you've finished the stalk, the sun comes out and it becomes a bit of a glorious day. But anyway, I won't waffle on too much now. Get straight into the story. Hopefully you enjoy it, and we'll see how it goes from there. So let's talk about this red stag that we went and shot recently. How did it all come about? Well, I was randomly talking to one of my customers and asked him whether or not he knew anywhere that I could go to get a stag. He basically came back to me and said, hold that thought, I'll ask a few questions. Now this was back in 2021, and we got closer and closer to the end of the season, and he basically said, I'm afraid I've not been able to sort anything for you. That's that. So that was it. It kind of happened and went away. Now 2022 came along, hadn't thought any more about it, and I got a sort of a message out of the blue. Oh, I've got a stag organised for you. Oh right, okay, cool. The next thing was I got a WhatsApp message that basically said you need to be at the pin location I'm about to send you at 9:30 on the 5th of October for your stag. So I was like, right, looked at the pin location, 2.5 hours away. So it was a bit of a, right, better get myself organised, and that was sort of a week before the 5th of October. So drove down to Pitlochery, which is obviously in Perthshire, middle of Scotland type of thing. And we arrived, I was supposed to get there at 9:30. I think I arrived slightly earlier, probably about 9:15. Drove up the track to be greeted by Ben, the keeper, and his ghillie was there, Gary. There was an Argo parked up, a fairly nice little place outside the game larder, and morning normal greetings, and sort of passed the time of day, found out what we were going to do, said what was the plan. We were going to leave from there, drive up in the Argo up onto the hill, and go out and see if we could get this stag organised. So got all our kit together, searching through everything, realised that I hadn't packed the bipod. He said, you will need a bipod. I'm like, well, we can shoot off a bag. He's like, no, bipod would be best. So rummaged my truck. Normally there's a bipod in there, but no, I couldn't find anything. So he nips back to his house, comes out with a Harris swivel bipod, stick that on the front of the rifle, put the rifle back in the bag, think I'll take the bag with me, then look at the space in the Argo and go, do you know what, forget it, we'll just stick the rifle between my legs and we will head off up the hill. So we're all loaded up into the Argo by this point, and I think it's getting on for just about quarter to 10. And we set off, we drive up past his pheasant pens, everything's looking good, discussing pheasants, and he's hand feeding these pheasants, and yeah, everything's going well. He's got other places and they're doing good. We carry on up and we arrive at the first gate. He hops out and he goes, oh look, my neighbour's just dragging a Highland cow that's died in the ditch out with the Manitou. So down in the valley there's a boy with a Highland cow attached to the end of a Manitou being lifted out of a ditch. Through the first gate, it starts to get quite steep as we're driving up through these sort of forestry tracks heading up. He goes, there's one gate we've got to go through which is locked, and then we're out onto the moor. So we come up to a big deer fence. Gary jumps out, unlocks the gate, we drive through, gate gets locked again, and now we're literally out on the hillside, heather all around us. We carry on following this Argo track that they've obviously got there, and trekking on, up and down, a bit bumpy through a few little rivers, and we rise up onto sort of a bit of a viewpoint that they've obviously got. He stops the Argo there and says, right, we're going to get out. So we all hop out and have a look round. You can hear some roaring in the distance. So obviously a few stags are having a bit of roar, but nothing major. Not for this time of the year. The rut has kicked off in many places and it's in full swing. But he's like, it's been a bit quiet here. So what's the plan of action? He goes, right, we're going to head off over that hill, go up that one, probably drop down the valley the other side, head up the next one, have a look, see what's going on. We'll carry on, and then it does start to level out a bit and we'll be able to see a bit more as we get further on. So rifles on the back, stick in hand, we start heading out. Nothing visible at the moment. We'd probably get just halfway to the rise of the first sort of summit, and he's like, there's three young stags there walking up the gully, and yeah, 3 spikers heading off, just hoping they just disappear at the top. No problem, they're not going to cause us any bother. We carry on, we climb the steepest part, we summit, we have a look around. Down to our right, which now heads back down to the water, the river at the bottom, we can see a stag, a small stag. Again, he's just moving off with us into the wind. Nothing major, we haven't disturbed him. He goes up and disappears over the crest of the next hill. We descend and we walk along the bottom of this, cross a bit of a river. It's pretty wet. The ground it obviously has rained probably a few days before. It's been fairly miserable actually yesterday. So the going is wet, everything's pretty soaking. Good kit, good boots, gaiters, just to basically try and stay as dry as you can. So now we're approaching the next hill. It's fairly steep, and off we go up it. Obviously these keepers are a bit like mountain goats and they just bob their way up to the top. Take a bit of time. I've got a rifle on my back and gradually get up to the summit of that one. Not too bad, not huffing and puffing too much, and we're having a good look, and we can't see that stag that we just moved over the summit, so he's probably just tucked in below us or something like that. But in the distance we can see another 6 young stags all balled up together on a bit of a hillside, and we can still hear the roaring going off to our left. So he's like, right, that's where we're heading over that direction. So again, we descend and descend. Haven't disturbed anything, haven't seen anything really apart from sort of young spiker looking stags and things like that, and immature animals. We're now trundling across quite an open sort of bowl with another rise probably about 200 or 300 meters in front of us, and we can still hear something roaring. So we start to ascend the next sort of high point, and just then we can hear a roaring up the hill to our left and a roaring directly in front of us. So obviously there's 2 stags having a bit of a call off. So we get a bit more height, and we see this fella as he's working his way up. He's just come off a bit of a grassy plain. Well, I'd say grassy plain, but like almost like thinner, grassy, heathery area. And he's now working his way up the hill to our left, where we can hear on the top or the other side of that hill something else calling. And then we spot down to our right again that group of 6 young immature stags. Now the one that's working his way up the hill keeps looking back at them, but then carries on a bit more, looks back. So we kind of will wait here for a minute and see what happens. So we sort of settle down, keep an eye on it. As he goes out of sight, it's like a big decision. It's like, well, we really do need to go that way, but we obviously don't want to disturb him. So Ben's like, what we'll do is we'll cross here, we'll work our way up, we'll try and stay behind him, probably follow his direction. The wind's in our favour, so as long as that's good, we're all okay. So we drop down again, across this big open plain, and start to ascend on the right hand side, up another steep embankment. Obviously, while we're walking across the plains, we're just randomly talking about all sorts of stuff. There's a good strong wind, so our sound is not going to carry forward. We can just talk about the day-to-day things. Keeping an eye, obviously, on the right to the 6 immatures that are sat. They're probably a good sort of 600-700 yards away, but they're milling about, and obviously we don't want to disturb them just in case they run into the wind and cause any problems. So we start to climb up now on this hill on the right, and we're going up and we can still hear the roaring, and we're following a track up. We haven't seen anything. We climb a bit more and then we look out into sort of over the ridge, and looking directly ahead of us, it's like, oh look, there's a load over there. There's a group of 3 immatures, there's a big fella in the middle, and then there's about 7 or 8 other young stags, and then another big fella. And it's like, okay, right, have a look at those. They're probably the best part of 800-900 yards away, but we can still hear the one to our right roaring. It's like, where's he going? So we descend back a bit, skirt round the bottom of this hill, and climb again to another viewpoint. Look out, they're still there. We're not really gaining any distance on them yet, but we're keeping an eye on it. All of a sudden, the one we've heard roaring is obviously, he's working the same route we are, and he descends into this group of stags. And we think, oh, it's going to really kick it all off, and it's going to make a right mix up, and they'll have a bit of a fight. But no, he just walks into the middle with the 2 big other stags and just joins them. And it's like, well, that's bizarre. Obviously the rut's not really kicking off, and they're not fighting for territory, and they're all milling about and just start grazing. So Ben says we're going to have to back off, and we're going to have to follow the route that the big guy's taken to actually get ourselves onto a hill above them where we could be in a shootable position. So back down again, skirting round, and you are literally skirting round hills. So we're working with the wind, it's blowing. It's not raining just yet, but it feels like it's starting to spit. We descend a bit more. We get ourselves some height. We start to climb back up again to another sort of viewpoint. Have a look. Now, at this point, we can see across to them, but that group of stags, something's unsettled them, and they're starting to move away. And he goes, there's nothing out there for them. If they go over that ridge, they're literally really exposed. They're going to be in the cold, in the horrid weather that's coming, because you can see in the distance, we can see the rain coming in, and he's not sure why they're going to sort of move and take themselves over that ridge. So now we're sort of watching things unfold, and we're watching, and they're still milling back and moving, and then they stop again, and we're standing there. He's like, well, we can either carry on round and try and get above them, but I don't think that's going to benefit us. He says, because all of a sudden, there's 2 immatures appear from the right. They cut across and they go and stand on the ridge. And this other group of stags that are there, including the 3 big mature ones, they start to move and drift to the ridge as well. He's like, well, it's not us. And no, it can't be us. They can't see us. We're tucked right in. The wind it's blowing, and I mean it's really blowing at us. It's a strong old wind. But all of a sudden we hear down to our right, quite a long way away, another animal starts to roar. Quickly get the binos out, have a look. There's a big stag down there, we think, and he's definitely got hinds with him, because we haven't seen any hinds all morning. And it's like, yeah, he's holding, hang on, let's have a look. He's got about 6 hinds, maybe 2 calves. Okay, right, that could be what's pushing them on, but we're still unsure. So at this point, Ben says what we're going to do is we'll radio Gary. So tell Gary that they've moved. He can start moving the Argo round from where we left him, because he was still sat back with the Argo where we'd hopped out, and we were obviously 3 or 4 hills away. So he gets a radio call through to Gary. Gary's going to set off, travel up a mine road that there is, and can then come in above us. So still out of sight, but he's getting a bit closer. Now, instead of walking back round the next hill, Ben's like, look, they're going. We'll make a beeline across to where they were, and we can then assess the situation. We can see over that ridge and see what's going on. So again, by this time, it's now chucking it down. And I mean, it's literally, the rain's coming in sideways. It's big, fat, wet rain. Pretty uncomfortable, but we start to move, keep moving. So we're heading in the direction of where the weather's coming from and where the animals have headed off over the ridge. And it's a big, flat, open area. You can see all the way down to the right down to the river. We've got our stag and his hinds, probably the best part of, 1,500, 2,000 metres away. and he's sat on a bit of a plateau in an area that's quite sheltered. They're not moving anywhere, they're just sat there. And we are now heading across to where we saw all our stags go over the ridge. So working our way through the rain, picking along, and we get to sort of where they were, which was quite sheltered, and we start to edge up onto the ridge slowly. Can't see anything at the moment, and as Ben said, it is pretty exposed. It drops away and it's a big flat open side of the hillside. There's no shelter there. There's nothing that's going to give them any warmth from this weather, and it was just bizarre that they'd headed over, but maybe the big fella down the bottom had just been roaring enough that they decided to edge over and get out of his line of sight. So we start to descend along this ridge, keeping our eyes open to the left, glassing quite a lot, seeing what's going on, and all of a sudden we pick up movement, and there's a couple of the young stags are kicking about. Then we see a bit more, and we can see a load of sat down. Can't see the three big fellas that were there. We spy one of them. He's kind of sat right in the middle. So we descend a bit more, but we back off slightly to get out of eyesight. Skirt around the bottom of the ridge. Come back up to have a look in, and I'm like, I wish I brought my rangefinder. Ben's like, no, I've got one. It's all right. Pulls it out. I'm like, they've got to be about 300 yards. Range finds 320. And I'm like, not shootable. But what we can move around, and I'm like, well, if we drop a bit more, maybe we can get in on them. So again, pull back, a bit more walking. The rain and the wind is now really cold. It's almost like it's turned winter. Everything's starting to sting. Bare hands. It's it's not pleasant. So we descend down into a wet sort of boggy bit, trek round a bit more, and we're working our way along this bottom of this gully, just trying to get ourselves into a possible shooting position. By the time we spy them again, we've dropped the distance to about 300 yards, and it's like there's no real way we're going to get any closer. We've looked at everything, and all the options are we either get too exposed, they're going to see us, but if they do see us and they run, at least they're going to run away and not near the big stag. But it's still a long shot. And he's like, nah, I don't think there's anything now. I'm like, well, okay, fair enough. So we draw back off them because we've now got eyes. There's two of them. You can see them and they're watching us. So we sort of drop low, sneak back in, work our way back round, out of the wind, slightly round the corner of this hillside. Radio up to Gary, explaining that we'd seen this load of immature stags, where we are, and what our next plan of action is. So at this point, we're thinking about what we're going to do. We get ourselves to an elevation point where we can still have a look down on the big fella that was holding hinds. He's still there, but he's starting to move, and there's a fence line down there, and he's going backwards and forwards, and all of a sudden he starts heading up the fence, and it's like he's on his way. What are we going to do now? He stops, and the hinds are still there. It's like maybe he's just trying to hold these hinds together and keep them in. So the plan of action is now to pull right over to the right to get on the low ground, skirt round below him, then come up onto these two like rocky outcrops where if we're above, we should open ourselves up and potentially be able to get a shot. So the wind's eased off a bit, and so is the weather, just slightly, and we start to descend. Now, walking around on this moor, you've got to watch out for, obviously, 1, you've got lots of heather. 2, you've got peaty bits with holes in it. 3, there's boggy bits, so you're walking along, poking away with your stick, trying to follow the mountain goat in front of you who bounces along. Next thing, he's whipped his banana out of his pocket and he's eating his lunch. I'm like, do you want to stop, get your lunch? He's like, no, if I don't eat it now, I'm going to squash my banana. Next thing, he's got his looks like a Greg's pasty out, and he's chomping away through that. I'm like, fair enough. He was explaining how when he used to stalk, when he first started, he either forgot to eat or he'd eat everything in the first 5 minutes and then be starving for the rest of the day. So he's learned to pace himself slightly. So we're carrying on, and we start to rise up again now. So the stag now realistically should be over on our left with his hinds, and we're rising up to the first outcrop. As we rise, I'm like, I'll hold back, you spy. If there is anything, I can move up. So that's easy enough. So he gets up there and the stag's not there. He's like, we'll move on to the next one just in case he's tucked himself in a bit because of the weather. So a lot can happen while you're working around the back of one hill. These animals, they will move and they can disappear like ghosts. So we carry on and we get to the next sort of slightly higher outcrop. He has a look over and there's nothing there. The stag has just vanished, and so have all the hinds. It's like, where have they gone? So you look at that stalker's face, and having taken people out stalking, you know with just one look, it's just like, oh, what am I going to do now? And you can just see his sort of, I'm not sure, we're going to have to keep trekking on and hopefully he'll be there. And then, as if on key, the stag just roars. He's like, but he's down there. So quickly we start sneaking around a bit further, getting around the back of this hill again. And he goes, well, we don't want to approach there because it's really boggy. What we'll do is move on a bit more. And it's like, there's his antlers. And you literally can see just on over the hillside, nothing else, just this great rack. And it's like, okay. So we move in a bit further on, and Ben's like, right, we're going to crawl in from here because we're going to get to that little rock and hopefully he'll still be there. So jams his stick in the floor, drops his telescope. I leave my stick there. He goes, right, give me your rifle. I'll take it in. I'll get it set up, look through it, make sure it's ready, and then you can come in behind next to me. And when you're ready, you can take the shot. Fine. So give him the rifle. He's like, okay, cool. He dries off the scope. We're ready to go. He gets down and he starts to crawl. I'm literally crawling behind him. My nose is touching his boots. Crawling in. He gets to the rock, gets the rifle out. You can see him just checking the bipod's tight, opens the leg, sets it up, gets me to come forward. He goes, there he is. He's sat down at the moment. So you've got in the scope, I can see the stag sat looking directly up at us. So his body is obviously facing downhill. To his right, you've got all the hinds standing up, grazing quite happily. So I've moved into position. Ben's like, are you comfortable? Is that clear in the heather? So I reach forward slightly, adjust one of the legs on the bipod. I'm like, yeah, I'm comfortable with that. Obviously, I know my rifle. Everything's good. And we're waiting. It's like, it's a cracking next shot. He goes, you can take it if you want. I'm like, nope, we'll wait for him to stand up. Obviously, big risk, because he could stand up, just turn and walk off down the hill. And we're lying there probably a good sort of 5 minutes studying and watching him keep checking through the scope, thinking he's going to move. The hinds are sort of grazing away slightly, so at any point he could stand up. And that's when it kind of happens. He literally stands, turns to the right, absolute perfect presentation, crosshairs, bang on. Reckon he's about 120 yards, 308 set for about an inch high at 100. So come up, centre of his chest, squeeze the trigger, boom. All happens fairly quickly. Fantastic reaction. He jumps up, reload the rifle, keeping an eye on him, and he just disappears. The hinds run and he follows them just out of sight, but just probably turns and runs, and that's it. Keeping everything still pointing down the hill. Just wait, pop the safety back on, turn to Ben. He's like, oh, that was fantastic. I don't think that was a cracking shot. He was off the ground with that shot. I'm like, well, we'll wait and see. And I've still got one up the spout. He goes, oh, I don't think you'll need it. I'm like, well, let's approach, and if we do, we've got it. If we don't, we'll unload it. So we just lie, get ourselves organised for a minute, stand up, walk back over, gather up all our walking sticks and put his telescope on his back. And for the first time, having that big stag in my eyesight, in the scope, I have never felt calmer. There was no adrenaline rush. There was nothing. It was just absolute sort of serenity. It was perfect. It's one of those things that everybody talks about like their buck fever and all the rest of it, but I can say for the first time ever that this was the calmest I've ever been, just lying there. Everything was just still. Even the weather had slowed down. As soon as I'd pulled the trigger, the rain stopped, and it hadn't started to brighten up, but it was better conditions, let's just say that. So we gathered everything up and we started to descend to where he was. We got to where the shot where he'd been sitting, you could see that quite clearly in the heather, and carried on down the hill, probably about another 10 yards, had a look, and there he was. You could just see his antlers. So got down to this fella, and he was a big lad, 13 points, lovely big brow tines, hadn't gone far at all. Happy. Obviously, a lot of people have seen the photos that I've posted up. We dragged him about 2 yards just to get him onto some flatter ground to get a few photos. Did a bit of an inspection of him. He was absolutely riddled with ticks, and I mean there's ticks everywhere, between his legs, back of his head, over his entire body, just these big grape-like looking ticks. And Ben's like, our hillside's really quite dirty. It's probably the dirtiest in the area. It just seems to have a lot of ticks. But what was really interesting was he was saying that it didn't feel like this was a true hill stag. He thought more that this was a forestry stag that had come up from the lower land and was obviously dominating the side of the hill, had got the hinds, and the other guys that were, if you looked at the hill stags that we were looking at earlier, they were much sort of thinner antlers, whereas this boy had some meat on him, and the antlers had a lot more thickness to them. So that was it. Ben was going to get on and get the grollock out, and it was like, he's like, are you happy? I'm like, yeah, I'm really happy. It's like, it's nice to watch somebody else do it. So we got talking while he opened the neck up, took out the esophagus, and basically tied that off, and then small incision around the stomach to pull all the guts out. Took it all out, and it was like, so do you inspect the glands and stuff like that? And he's like, no, not really, but I can do that back at the larder. So it was interesting, because obviously seeing how these hill stalkers do it compared to sort of how we've all been trained to do it, it's just one of those things. Then we found, it was like, oh, there's the entry, and then the bullet was on, you could feel a lump just under his skin. So as we dug out the 150 grain soft point that I'd shot him with, and it had mushroomed beautifully, but it hadn't fully penetrated. So it made it through the shoulder, but it just got stuck under the skin. So we got the bullet out. That's always something to keep as a souvenir. Stuck that in my pocket. It was actually a phone call up to Gary, because obviously there was no signal on the radios, but first time I was stalking in an area where you've actually got perfect phone signal, especially out on the hillside. So I phoned him up, and we had to wait just for the Argo to come in. So sat down, had some lunch, a bit more of a chat about the stag. And the weather had actually cleared up completely. So the Argo pulls in, we load the stag on, get him ready to winch him on, pop him in the back. They even pick up the grollock off the site, so that goes into a bucket. I'm like, what do you take that back for? He goes, look above you, and there was a couple of ravens. He goes, if I feed the ravens back at home, they don't follow us out when we're out stalking. So that was quite interesting. Keeps them away from him while he's out on the hillside. Otherwise he's got ravens making a noise and potentially alerting the deer that there's stalkers out there, because they seem to follow people. And then came the bumpiest ride of your life, driving an Argo off the hill, 3 guys and 100 kilo stag in the back of it, and literally going up all the terrain we'd walked over to get to a track right on the far side of the hill. So on their estate, they've got a bit of a mine of some description. Can't remember what they said they were mining, but they've got 25 years of mining there. It's a very small operation, but they've built this huge, great mine road in. So you bounce along all the peat bogs and all the rest of it, and then all of a sudden, in the middle of nowhere, there's this absolutely perfectly flat mine road with snow pylons either side of it to tell you the snow depth. And we started trundling down that. We probably did a mile and a bit down this road before all of a sudden a sharp turn and you're back off again. and we're heading back down to where we had actually come in. But the Argo tracks were fairly wet and worn. We were getting there. Back down to the deer gate, through the deer gate again, back down through the woodland. Sun's come out by this point. All the way back to the larder. We're standing around outside now. We've got back, and it's a bit of a, what do you reckon the weight is? And I'm like, it's got to be 100 kilos. Ben's like, I reckon 92. Gary's 98. So get him in the larder, get it on the scales, and it comes in at 113 kilos. 13-pointer, 113 kilos. He's like, that's a good size animal. Then again, they lay him into like a cradle, and he, just watching him butcher and take the legs off and finish the grollock, absolutely lovely to see somebody else do it, and it just makes a huge difference. So we've lots of questions, lots of chatting, hanging back up again, whip the head off, and that pretty much ended my stalk. It's a very memorable stalk. It's a fantastic trip out. Loaded everything back into the truck and took a 2.5 hour drive home to back up to Aberdeenshire. And you can't really, long day, 5 a.m. in the morning to sort of just after 4 in the afternoon. I was incredibly lucky to be sort of given this opportunity as a bit of a thank you by the customer, and sending me down and organising it and getting this stag. So yeah, it certainly makes it one of those ones you'll always remember, and you can't really thank people enough. But obviously that's somebody that knows what I like doing, and their way of saying thanks was to get that organised. So yeah, we'll end this podcast here, but hopefully you've all enjoyed listening to the story of that latest red stag. That brings another episode to a close. Thank you for listening, and thank you for being an audience this far. So going forward, we've got another load of guests lined up, gradually trying to build a good list of people to get podcasts with. It's just, again, it's time and getting everything arranged. Sometimes people trying to come up. We're doing a lot remotely just because I'm in the back end of nowhere, being Aberdeenshire. Probably try and run another competition at some point on the social media site, similar to last time. It'll be a like, follow and share type of thing, possibly with more stalking, and might try and get a few more things out of some suppliers, so some stuff that's relevant to stalking and stuff like that. Bit of a giveaway. It's just a bit of fun for everybody. Random number generation at the end of it, and somebody will win and potentially come and shoot a Scottish roe. Anyway, we'll leave it there for now, and check back again soon for another podcast.